This is the In the Rabbit Hole episode archive project. What you're about to watch and listen to is a past episode from In the Rabbit Hole Urban Survival Podcast. You can learn more by visiting intherabbithole.com. Be sure to like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel now.
And now two guys who survived a zombie attack, Aaron and Jonathan.
Howdy, and welcome to episode 68 of In the Rabbit Hole's Urban Survival Podcast. In this episode, it's just you and me. We get cozy and talk about outsmarting our own minds. I'm your host, Aaron, and you are in the rabbit hole, safe and sound. Today's show is sponsored by Cat's Coffee. If you're looking for truly exceptional coffee to help you survive the morning or the next zombie apocalypse, you need to be drinking Cat's. They specialize in the finest coffee from sources that prioritize environmental responsibility and are fair trade certified. Their goal is to achieve perfection in every cup. Check them out at Catz, K-A-T-Z as in zebra, coffee.com, or click on their bright green banner on the site and make sure you're dealing with an official sponsor of the show. Again, that's Catz, K-A-T-Z as in zebra, coffee.com. Okay, so today Jonathan is out taking care of some personal stuff, so it's just going to be you and me today. And today's show is something that I realized within this last week is a pretty common topic that somehow I don't think we've ever actually covered, at least not in depth, and that is a common topic within the survival community and within military and law enforcement communities as well, which is normalcy bias and situational awareness. And these are extremely important kind of exercises to be aware of in mental states. It's probably a better way of putting it, to be aware of. And if you've heard of it before and you've read about it before or come in contact with these concepts before, I'm also going to throw in a third one today to make it more applicable to everyday life and other things to consider. And really, when I thought of it, I was really kind of taken aback that it had never really been joined with these other two topics. Let's launch in first to what is normalcy bias? Normalcy bias is the underlying mental state that inhibits a person or person's ability to even consider the possibility of a disaster. Wow, how familiar are we with that? If you're listening to a survival podcast, whether ours or any one of the others, or you're reading online material, you've at some point very early on in the stage looked around and realized how clueless other people around you are about the even idea that disaster, or for that matter, just bad things can happen in one's life. That is then exacerbated when we try to have a conversation with someone that is not interested in preparedness. Because for the most part, we're a pretty strong, tight-knit community. And when people get in, they get interested in it, and they want to tell other people about it. They want to have a conversation about it. They're concerned and they say, you're my friend, you're my family. I want you to know about this. I want you to open your eyes and be aware of this. And what we often get back is this resistance. Oh, that could never happen. Oh, what could go wrong? I mean, there's a famous last words right there. What could go wrong? Then, and a lot of times we try to convince them and start showing them different ideas and different scenarios, and well, you've got this or that. Or we even make the argument where you have homeowners insurance in case you have a fire. Not terribly likely, but it does happen, and it's something to guard against. You have a spare tire in your vehicle, because flat tires don't happen all the time, but they do happen occasionally. So we make these arguments, but we still find resistance. And we did a whole show a while back on convincing others to prepare that we'll link about in the show notes today, and that we will come back to again in the near future. But what we're coming up against, that resistance, is normalcy bias. And we can boil it down into a less kind of sterile explanation than what I initially said, which is I don't want to believe that things can go wrong. Therefore, I'm going to ignore it. Another example would be that I was speaking to someone one day about it, and we started really getting into it. And we started really examining some topics together. And some of them were way too big, and I shouldn't have broached those subjects with that person. But they immediately kind of started clamming up and saying, I don't even want to think about it. I don't even know what to do about it, so I don't want to think about it. That's normalcy bias. Normalcy bias is it can't happen to me. It can't happen to you. It can't happen here. And that can apply to so many things. There was a book in particular that was an interesting book in premise. Personally, I did not like the book, and I know Jonathan didn't like the book either. And this was a book that's very heavily talked about in the law enforcement and survival community, and the book is called The Gift of Fear. The book had a very interesting premise, and the book's primary focus was normalcy bias, and it was a collection of stories about people that had fallen victim to normalcy bias and chosen to ignore their own instincts, ignore warning signs within a situation. And it's a pretty interesting book. I didn't really like it. I felt it was too many stories and not enough meat. But it's a very popular book, and most people actually really do like it. That book focused solely on victims of violence. And when we hear the word victim, that's usually what we think of, almost immediately. But normalcy bias doesn't just apply to violent situations. It can apply to anything. If we fall victim to normalcy bias, we are just that. We are a victim no matter what the situation is. So the way to then turn that around is the topic we'll get to a little while, which is situational awareness. There's an example of normalcy bias that I thought was really interesting, and it's topical, and this will date the show a little bit, but there was an interview conducted on CNBC with Vice Chairman of Berkshire Hathaway, Charlie Munger. The interview made headlines when he said, "Civilized people don't buy gold." And he went on to talk about that civilized people invest in productive business. And we can argue back and forth about that. Personally, I thought it was a very asinine statement to make. But the more interesting part of the interview to me was something he said early on, which was the person conducting the interview asked him about his reaction to Warren Buffett's prostate cancer. And he said, "I view it as a non-event. I don't even allow them, meaning doctors, to check for it. I think it's likely to cause them to do something dumb. Cause them to do a dumb thing." He was a really old man and he mumbles, so it's kind of hard to understand exactly what he was saying. So I may not be regurgitating and quoting exactly, but pretty close. I watched it like 5 times to try to get the wording as correct as I could for you. What was amazing to me was that the journalist did not dig any deeper into that statement. And as I understand it, here's also a man that would be in line if something happened to Warren Buffett to take over. So what on earth does that mean? I mean, I don't even check. It cause him to do a dumb thing. Like what? And really what it is I don't want to know about it. I want to stick my head in the sand. And that's essentially what normalcy bias is. It's sticking your head in the sand about a topic. Another story that's related is a good friend of mine's father-in-law recently got diagnosed with prostate cancer. And he was checking on a regular basis. He chose to not be a victim of a health issue. He chose to confront it and to follow the advice of his doctor. He got it checked regularly. And one day they found it. And fortunately, they found it early enough and they were able to do something about it. So now today, he's recovering, he's doing well, he's getting back into really good health. But I think the point that really kind of drives it home is that now, instead of his family laying flowers on his grave, he'll soon be going to his youngest daughter's wedding, where she will be throwing flowers. And he just recently met his first grandchild. These would be the things that he would have missed. And Lord knows what else he would have missed had he decided to not get his PSA levels checked, not have any kind of prostate exams, thinking that it might cause doctors to do a dumb thing. And yeah, doctors can make mistakes. And I don't know exactly what dumb thing he was referring to because journalists didn't ask him to elaborate, but I can only imagine. And then in that situation, it would need to be addressed and carefully examined. And that's why we get second opinions, so that somebody doesn't just start cutting on us for no reason or because of a mistake. That's really normalcy bias. It's that thing that keeps us from acknowledging that something could go wrong. There's lots of examples of that in our lives. That I don't want to take care of it today. I don't want to face the problem. I want to ignore it. How many things in our lives have we put off doing because we didn't want to face them? We didn't want to deal with them. We wanted normalcy. We wanted things to stay exactly as they are. People do it all the time. They don't get home alarms. They don't tend to their family's needs. They don't take preemptive measures to guard themselves against bad things happening. And the excuse is generally, whether we're talking about survival or anything really, oh, that could never happen, or oh, that's so unlikely. Now, some things I will say are so unlikely, and the cost, whether it be time, money, or energy, isn't worth it. So if we were going to talk about building a bunker or something, there are pros and cons against it, but if at the same time we're not focusing on what's going on in our lives and tending to other things that are more pressing, but instead worrying about this thing that concerns us and spending all of our money on something that is so extremely remote, then we're going too far. Related to normalcy bias is another kind of bias. And this is the point that when I thought of it, I was really kind of taken aback by the idea that it had not been mentioned. And that's the idea of desire bias. Desire bias, it's kind of funny. It actually, if you look up the 7 deadly sins, desire bias in a lot of ways follows those same 7 deadly sins. Most of them anyway. But let's start with love, acceptance, and sex. Pretty much all kind of the same thing. Subtle nuances definitely apply. But I had this friend. I still have this friend. We'll call her Tammy. Tammy goes out into the world like this big, needy black hole, constantly needing attention, acceptance, and approval, and is almost overwhelmed by the idea that she has to get married. That leads her to look at every single date she goes on as, is this Mr. Right? Even the first date, you have no idea. You're just getting to know this person. How can you possibly even be? I mean, yeah, we've all been there and we've all sat there across from a table, started questioning, does this person have the qualities that I'm looking for in a lifelong partner? But there's a difference between just having those natural thoughts and considerations as walking into the situation going, I'm going to marry this person, or I am grilling this person to figure out if they really are marriage material or not. So what happens with that? We create a desire bias whereby we focus on one thing, one quality that attracted us to that person, and we choose to ignore the other things because we desire this one thing so much. And I've watched Tammy, I've known Tammy for roughly about 10, 11 years. And in that time, I've watched her go on countless dates. And always within the first, after like a date or two, all of a sudden she's in a relationship with somebody. And my question to her is always, how can you even be in a relationship with somebody that you don't even know yet? I mean, you've been on 2 dates or a date. How can you be in a relationship with somebody? That doesn't mean sleeping around. That doesn't mean any of those things. It just means how can you enter into a committed relationship with somebody and start investing all of your energy into someone you don't even know yet? The answer is desire bias. Putting all of our eggs in one basket for a desired outcome. In the course of the time that I've known her, she has managed to go from one loser after another, after another, after another, because she is so blinded by her desire to be accepted and for somebody to marry her. In a couple instances, one guy even turned out to be a real con artist and ended up bilking her for a bunch of money. And there were warning signs all along the way. And to this day, it's almost I almost have a normalcy bias around the idea that she couldn't see these things. The guy had a long history of being kicked out of the house by his family and being ostracized and having money problems and all this. Not to say that we can't look at people and they have bad things in their lives and that does happen. But what it does mean is if somebody has a history of just bad shit, the old expression where there's smoke, there's fire applies. Something's going on there. Something is not right. Something is not clicking. And it demands attention and it demands to be looked at carefully. These are warning signs. In one instance, and I don't want to laugh, but it's in some way, it's just so comical. I don't know what other reaction to really have to it. One guy actually turned out, I don't know for positive, but the story I got back was that he had been diagnosed as a sociopath. Nothing says, I want to love you and spend the rest of my life with you and make babies with you like, oh, you're a sociopath. How nice. Let's get it on. I'm at such a loss for that one. It's what she chose to focus on was, he's a sociopath. Oh, but he has a great sense of humor and he's a good job. And so she started ignoring all these other things because she chose to focus on the things that she liked and was letting her desire drive her forward. Now, she's kind of an extreme example, but I think most people in their lives have either experienced doing that or have an extreme example of somebody that does that kind of stuff. Another one would be, to kind of give a men's perspective, would be, or how many guys have we known that have blown entire paychecks on a girl just trying to get her into bed? That is a stereotype. A lot of guys are actually looking for some sort of real connection, but then again, a lot of guys are still just want to sleep with that woman. And they throw money and money and money and expensive dinners and jewelry and all this stuff, and they're chasing this thing. For what? And they become, again, consumed by a desire and chase after something. And actually, I do know some women that have done that too. So let's talk about money. Money is another easy desire bias. How many of us have gotten those scam Nigerian emails? Oh, if you'll just give me your bank account information, I'll put $1 million in your bank account and then we can split it 50-50. I have to get my money out of the country. Our desire for money overwhelms the good sense of, why would somebody possibly do this? That makes no sense. How is it they can't get their money out? I look at those and I think, wow, that's stupid. Why would anybody do that? But somebody must be doing it because these emails keep going and they keep getting worse. And it's just like when we mentioned the guy that was a con artist earlier, these are all things that con artists use typically to get people, is focusing on one of these desires, because they know if they can hit the right one or hit it just right, they can get somebody to ignore all of the warning signs that are all there right in front of them. So, but money also not just some kind of scam. Money, we can talk about jobs as a desire bias. I've known plenty of people that it was coming from a mile away that they were going to lose their job, but they did absolutely nothing to insulate themselves. They did nothing to take preemptive measures, find another job, start looking for another job, put the resume together, do anything. They would try to grip on to what they had so tight, and they were so focused in putting all of their energy, rather than saying, you know what, I'm going to put 75% of my energy into trying to hang on to this and make it right, but I'm going to put another at least 25% into a plan B. How am I going to get out of here? How am I going to get my next job? When there wouldn't really be that much energy needed to be expended in a lot of cases to find another job, barring we're in some kind of economic disaster or something. But the desire to keep what we have and what we know, so especially when it comes to a job, is so strong, people have a tendency to just focus down and ignore other things that they should be doing. Or people ignore being used by a boss. Now, there are a lot of instances where people do something and it's like, oh, well, the boss gets all the credit. There are instances where that is actually appropriate. Most instances, it's not. There needs to be credit given to a team, but people ignore that and they just kind of, oh, well, I like the benefits here or something. this is not the only company that has benefits. Start looking, get out of this situation, make your life better, do something. But the desire to have stability and have a constant source of money, and they focus in. I've also seen this happen in failing businesses. I have a very close friend whose family owned quite a few liquor stores and convenience stores, and then at one point, they bought a very large restaurant. The restaurant started failing, and they started selling off the smaller businesses that were doing just fine to save the large one. Because they were so focused and their desire was so great to make this one big thing work that they ignored that it wasn't working and ignored what was working and started sacrificing the good to save the bad. I've seen that happen in businesses all the time. There becomes this sacred cow or this pet project, and money, time, and energy just keeps getting poured into it and poured into it and poured into it when all of the signs point to this isn't working, this is a waste of energy, and there are all these other more productive things that are already doing okay that if we put all of this energy into those could be made to do better. I've seen somebody has completely ignored that their idea is terrible or that their idea is just not practical, even when they're told by other people that they are trying to sell their product to, this doesn't work. This isn't a good time. This isn't the right place. The expenses are too high. People don't buy that. But they keep chugging on anyway and just keep throwing money down a hole, trying to get after something when they could have put that time and energy into something else that is either already productive or just letting it go and looking for something else that is more productive. But we get hung up on that one thing. And that's happens a lot in business. Another one is anger. If you've ever been in a fight, you'd know most fights completely avoidable. One person just could have said, you know what? Not worth it. Or, hey, you know what? Let's just walk away. There are times when you are forced into something like that. But most of the time, one or both parties could have just easily walked away. But we let our anger and our desire to get even or to be right overwhelm good judgment. Or it leads us to being passive aggressive. Somebody does something to us and again, I want to get even. So we start doing stupid little things, indirect things to try to screw with the person as much as we can. What a tremendous waste of time and energy. We could have spent that time and energy getting away from the person or trying to fix whatever it was that we felt we were wronged. A story on myself relative to anger was one time I was in a hit and run. This was about 15 years ago. I was driving along. I was out on a date with my girlfriend at the time. We were both dressed up. I don't know where we were going, but wherever it was, I was in a suit. She was in a dress. She was wearing lots of jewelry. We were driving through downtown, and at that point in time, downtown Houston was not the greatest place in the world. All of a sudden, somebody runs a red light and slams into me. Stop the car, start to get out, and the passengers and driver in the other car jump out of the car and start taking off running. I'm suddenly overwhelmed with anger and start just chasing these jerks. And I got probably a good 100 yards down the road chasing these guys when something snapped and I realized, holy crap, I just left my girlfriend wearing jewelry in a damaged vehicle by herself. I have no idea if she's okay. I have no idea if somebody's taken the opportunity to now mug her. So I was blinded by my desire to get even. My anger took over. And I chased after something that was pointless. What was I going to do? Envy is another desire bias. And it can cause us to desire to be better than someone or to have more than someone so much that even with friends, we withhold support or information that could help them out. Maybe you haven't done it, but maybe you've seen somebody do it. Or we ignore, and I think this is a big one right now in society, is that we ignore the full truth about someone else's life because we envy what they have. One day my father was working out with a personal trainer. One day they were working out and doing lunges or something out in front of the personal trainer's house, and a doctor that lived in the neighborhood drove up in, I don't actually remember what it was. I think it may have been a Ferrari, it may have been a Porsche, but he drove up in a really expensive sports car. And the trainer said, why does that guy have all that money? What does he need it for? Envy. What does it matter? He earned it, but you don't know anything about his life. You don't know what his expenses are. You don't know how hard he worked to get where he is. This trainer was now blinded by envy that this guy really could have earned it, that he didn't get there easily. And even if he did get there easily, big deal. Yeah, we can all be a little jealous of somebody that has more than we do, but we don't know the facts. We don't know what they did to get there. We don't know what kind of struggles they went through to get there. So envy can be another one that causes us to do something stupid or ignore things about other people simply because we're being judgmental about what they have and making assumptions. And we see this a lot going on in the United States right now with class warfare, most of which is completely ridiculous. A lot of it being spouted by people that they themselves are the class that they're complaining about. Pride's another one. We kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, but pride is that I must be right. I have to be right, and I will make stupid decisions and hurt other people because of my bias towards being right and not being willing to accept that I may be wrong. It also, in many cases, keeps people, and men were especially bad about this, but it keeps people from seeking help when there's a problem because they don't want to look weak. So they continue to suffer with whatever the problem is because of this bias towards pride. Laziness is another one. The desire to do as absolutely little as possible and get as much as possible. In most cases, that's kind of how we all live our lives. We want to expend as little energy as we can to get as much as we can. But there's a point where it becomes a desire bias, a point at which we look at things and say, oh, that's too much work. And there are times when something is just not worth it. But how many people have said, oh, I really want to do this thing and I want to be this or I want to do that. And then they find out, oh, that's too much work. I don't want to. Or they're particularly a jerk and try to weasel their way into getting somebody else to do it, thereby eventually alienating themselves from the people that they're mooching off of. Now that we've run through those, what is situational awareness? Situational awareness refers to the awareness that things in our immediate environment or in our future environment can do us harm. In a lot of instances, it's easiest to talk about this in a physical sense. If you're in a place, you're having to consider what is your mental and physical condition. Who is around you? What is the safety of the location? Are there any dangers within the location? What level of volatility is present in the location that you're in? What are your needs? From there's a lot of variables that come into play. And they're so numerous, I'm just really going to talk about other people because that, in a lot of cases, is the thing that concerns us the most. And often, other people are what is most dangerous to us within the context of what we're talking about today, and especially within the context of survival. So we have to examine, are there strangers around us? What is their body language? What is their perceived intentions? How many of them are there? What potential for interaction do we have? Do any of these strangers look like they could be of help? Or there could be a police officer or an EMS or paramedic. They're still strangers, but they're in a helpful capacity. So not everything about strangers is about somebody that can do you harm. It's also about identifying who can help you. There's a book called The Survivor's Club. Really pretty interesting book. One of the things that the author examined is airline safety and what happens in plane crashes and who survives and who doesn't and why. One of the interesting points that came up was that flight attendants will size people up as they're coming onto the plane, and they're looking for specific traits. They're looking for specific types of people that would be of help in a disaster situation. That's situational awareness as well. Understanding who's there, what they can, what they can't do, and so forth. Similarly, it is the responsibility of every person getting on that plane to understand where are the exits, what safety equipment is available. When I get onto a plane and get seated, I always count the rows. Where is the exit behind me? Where is the exit in front of me? And I actually do pay attention to the safety briefing, which I used to not do, but now I do. What tools are there to help me if something goes wrong? What tools are there that I may help the person next to me if things go wrong? And that leads us into, how do we exercise situational awareness? And how do we get rid of normalcy bias? Or limit it as much as humanly possible in our lives. And how do we limit or get rid of desire bias as much as we can in our lives? To start with desire biases, the best way to do it is to be cognizant of them. Think about things. What are the most important things? What things drive you in your life? And then ask, are those things that are driving me in my life, are those desires blinding me to things? It also really helps to ask for an outsider's perspective on what you're doing in your life, and then to actually listen to what they have to say. And don't just get one, get multiple. I was working for an electrician one time in college, and I don't remember exactly what the conversation was, but he used an expression that has kind of stuck with me ever since. And the expression was, it looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, and it talks like a duck, probably a duck. And you know what? If one person tells you you have a tail, you can probably ignore them. If two people tell you you have a tail, you might want to turn around and look. If three people tell you you have a duck's tail, you need to turn around and figure out you might be a duck, and probably are. And that's another thing. We see people go out and get advice and then completely ignore the advice or completely ignore the outsider's perspective. When we hear what we don't want, and usually what that is the desire to be right, and all we're really looking for is for affirmation. And that's where it becomes so important to actually listen. Situational awareness in the more conventional sense, examine your surroundings everywhere you go. Limit your distractions. Ask yourself, what are the dangers around me? And then ask, where are the exits? How many exits? Are they blocked? Where are the tools around me that I can help myself and help others? Where are the fire extinguishers? Where are the fire hoses? Where are the axes? Where's the fire alarm? Where are the stairwells? And then also ask, who around me is a potential danger? Who around me is unstable? Who around me looks like a criminal? Who around me is a criminal? The opposite of that is to ask, who around me is of potential help? Who around me is stable? Who around me, in my experience, has shown that in tough situations, they themselves don't typically fall victim to normalcy bias and can handle themselves? Or at the very least, who around me is wearing the uniform of help and probably has the experience and the understanding and has taken active measures in their lives and in their mental state to rid themselves of normalcy bias? Final one is to not become hyper-focused on things to the exclusion of all else, to the exclusion of all other possibilities. We see this a lot in the survival community. People will pick one thing that scares them and hyper-focus in on that. Whether it be EMPs, whether it be solar flares, whether it be riots, whether it be the crazy guy down the street, or the old lady with too many cats. Whatever we want to look at, a lot of survivalists really do become hyper-focused on one thing, and that's all they prepare for, at the cost of all other possibilities. We talked in a previous episode briefly about black swan events that happen and that we didn't see coming. A piece of that is largely due to the exclusion of other things. We were so busy focusing over here that we missed what was to the left of it. Just like a magic show, we get misdirected. We're so busy watching the beautiful assistant in her skimpy outfit that we don't notice the magician off in the corner stuffing a rabbit in his pants or in his hat. And the same can be said about any of the disasters that we look at. And this is the reason why we harp on so much, focusing on the basics. Don't worry too much about the big stuff. You can be concerned by the big stuff, but don't let it consume you to the point that you don't see other threats that could be much more probable than whatever it is you're focused on. I'm going to leave you with a question for today. A couple questions, actually. The first one is, as soon as you stop listening to this show, will you think about what I've said? Will you start actively trying to employ these thought processes into your daily life, moment by moment? Second question is, will you consider your desires? Will you consider whether or not they are overriding your better judgment? And ask yourself whether or not you're hyper-focused on a single event, single type of disaster, at the exclusion of all other possibilities, thereby being distracted and missing the magician in the corner with the rabbit in his pants. Before we close out the show today, one more thing. The rabbit hole has become so much more than just a podcast and a blog. It's become a community. People are getting on the forum and they're exchanging ideas and really putting out some amazing stuff and some truly heartfelt stuff as well, moment by moment. Second question is, will you consider your desires? Will you consider whether or not they are overriding your better judgment? And ask yourself whether or not you're hyper-focused on a single event, single type of disaster, at the exclusion of all other possibilities, thereby being distracted and missing the magician in the corner with the rabbit in his pants. This has been an episode from the In the Rabbit Hole Urban Survival Podcast. You can learn more by visiting intherabbithole.com. Be sure to like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more great survival stuff.